what do you think about when you're not intentionally trying to think about something? What is unintentional mulling like?
Yeah, I think it varies. If there is something, so for example, when we started with, like, at the start of the pandemic, when we knew we were going to be working from home for a while, we were having this conversation that is there's still reason for us to be in, like right now we're in Menlo Park, and do we still need to be here, or should we go somewhere else and try something different and things of that sort. And if that, like when we were trying to figure that out, that might be something that is in my mind. I don't expect to be able to have an answer to it like instantly in a conversation with you. I expect to have to just let it mull in my head. So if something of that sort is going on, then that might mull. If there is something somewhat stressful that's going on, then that might keep popping in my head every so often, if even if I'm not explicitly trying to think about it. Um, yeah, sometimes it might be that I'm looking forward to my macrame and my origami and thinking about what I might make next. Um, yeah, I do sometimes have a tendency to overthink interpersonal sort of relationships or equations or interactions, where I might feel like that may not have been the best thing. But I wonder if I went overboard in a certain direction, and then I might try and think about that to see whether I really did go overboard, and if the other person might be thinking about it a certain way. And so some of that might mull, things like that.
And what do you tend to think about when you're not intentionally trying to think about something? What happens on the back burner?
Yeah, and I think, I think one thing that we've learned about psychology is a lot of cognition is subconscious. You don't really know. And like I said, I've done a certain amount of reading of creativity, and a lot of it is probably going on completely below your actual, perceptual ability and conscious reflection on. So, I mean, obviously there's all these classic stories in science where people suddenly, like I said, you get these light bulb phenomena, and they're sometimes hard to analyze. It really wasn't some methodical process that you were going through as part of your conscious thought. It's like there's just all this stuff that's going on beneath the surface that's subconscious, and suddenly some ideas will come together there. So, I think a lot of times you have your best ideas when you're. I mean, I think this has been demonstrated in the literature on creativity. You have your best ideas when you're not actively thinking about them, where it's just sort of bubbling around in your subconscious, and then I know there's these classic examples of dreams or whatever, like Kekula discovering the structure of the carbon ring or something. Again, a lot of those you have to be very skeptical about. But I think a lot of creativity does come not when you're actively thinking about it, but just absorbing all this knowledge and letting your subconscious sort of mush it. And then if you're lucky, something will come together, and then that insight will rise to consciousness.
Makes sense. And what do you tend to think about? What do you tend to think about when you're not intentionally trying to think of something?
Probably just whatever is most unsettled. There's some paper I was reading and I don't quite understand it, and I need to juggle around and try to figure out what was going on, or need to give a talk tomorrow and I don't think the messaging is quite right, or I need to give a talk next week and I don't think the messaging is quite right, and like trying to just juggle it around and think about that. I don't know, like whatever is kind of just in the queue of needs to be attended to at some point is kind of just bubbles up.
Interesting. And so you get a sense that there is a queue that you're subconsciously maintaining.
Yeah, I mean, like what kind of queue is it? It's probably like biased by recency and, who knows what the order is, and there's randomness to it. But yeah, it feels like once something is settled, it's like, okay, that's how I need to do it, or that's how it works, then it kind of loses its priority and sort of room for the next thing emerges.
And what do you tend to think about when you're not actively trying to think about something? What goes on the back burner?
Oh, yeah.
To the extent that you're aware of it.
Right. So I don't know. I feel like so perhaps the reason why I couldn't answer what are the things that what are the successes or the achievement that I am fond of is because when I'm not really thinking about anything in particular, my brain just suddenly starts, going over all those, let's say, mistakes or the embarrassing stuff that I've done, like ever since I was like 7 or 8 years old. I mean, I think one of the things that my brain just gets to is, when was it? Like sometime, I think I was like 6 or something like that in the kindergarten. And then there was some kind of event at the kindergarten. And then, that event was some kind of birthday party of all those, the kids in the kindergarten or something like that. And then as part of that event or party, like the one boy, one girl, they kind of paired up, and then you had to do some kind of marching in the building or something like that. And then I was matched to one of the girls in the kindergarten. And then I feel like I wasn't, somehow for some random reason, wasn't really fond of, walking together with her on the hallway or something like that. And, I did not express it like explicitly. I mean, I'm pretty sure I couldn't even do that, but just, I had that, I didn't look happy. I feel like, if I remember correctly, right? And then that one just kills me. And the fact that, what did I know? And then why did I hate this girl so much that I didn't even feel, come out happy in that kind of one of the happiest moments in the kindergarten years. And then those things just, it comes to me. I'm like, oh no, stop. I got, then, that's when I, open up the Netflix and start watching some random stuff. Yes.
Interesting. Your replay buffer is filled with like high perceived loss examples. Like,
Exactly. Perhaps a bit too much.
yeah. What do you tend to think about when you are not actively trying to think about something? What goes on in the back burner?
The back burner. I don't remember. Probably nothing. I try to stay focused, just not to think about anything.
What do you think about most when you're not intentionally trying to think about something? Like, what do you have awareness of what goes on the back burner?
Yeah, I mean, it just depends on what's going on. If there's something I'm sort of anxious about that's upcoming, my mind will shift to that. If not, then I might start to think about travel or random little things I can optimize in my life.
So there's a background thread that's always optimizing things.
Pretty much. I mean, it's not always work related either. It could be just anything, like, how to get the shopping done faster or whatever.
That's cool. You get it for free.
Yeah, exactly.
And what do you tend to think about when you're not actively trying to think about something? What goes on at the back?
Probably skiing. I do a lot of stupid puns. There's a lot of stupid wordplay that goes on in my head. I'd say that's the default cogs turning noise.
Want to give us an example?
I forget them. So if I think of one, later.
Sure, anytime during this conversation, feel free to.
Yeah. No, because I've got some, that I'm really proud of. I could look at I have a WhatsApp with 3 or 4 like-minded friends where we share them. So I could possibly look at that later.
There's got to be the world's most glorious WhatsApp thread ever, which is puns going back and forth.
Terrible puns, typically.
But to an audience that appreciates it. So,
yes, indeed. Yeah.
What do you tend to think about when you're not actively trying to think about something? Like, what do you think goes on on the back burner when you give things time, for example?
I think that when I don't try to think about anything. I actively try very hard to not occupy my brain with a lot of things, and so I try not. This is a big part for me, where I want to occupy my brain with not a lot of thoughts and ideas and lists and stuff like that, which is also why I try not to I said that I try not to overthink a lot, because I felt that it was getting, I almost had no time to relax, and I felt that was important. And so if I try to, when I want to make a decision and I want to give it time, I'll try to occupy all of my other senses some other way, like watch a movie or listen to music or be with friends and chat about whatever. So try to keep active in other ways.
What do you tend to think about when you're not actively trying to think about something? What goes on the back burner?
Again, can be in the front burner too, but
Right.
what do I think about? Yeah, I think it's whatever is on my, like, it's not one thing. If I'm reading a book, then sometimes it's like the book that I think about. If I'm like working on a paper and it's kind of on my mind what the story should be, then I would think about that. If I had some like, involved discussion with someone, then I would think about, the discussion, what I said, what they said, and so on. Yeah, maybe after this, I would think about all the stupid things that I said here, most likely. But yeah, it depends on what's going on at the time.
And what do you tend to think about when you're not actively thinking about anything? What goes on in the back burner?
Too many different things, because as I said, I connect things, and so it becomes, actually I used to play this game. It's a very strange thing, right? I mean, for AI people, I always felt that for AI people, having a kid is sort of like Skinner having a kid. You're always seeing, poke them and see what they're doing. I didn't have to poke, I just have to see what's going on in his brain. But the other thing is your own mind, which so in some sense, in the sense that we are really trying to do something with the machine, but partly because you're eternally humbled by what our little brains can just do, our little minds can do. And so one of the issues is that the fact is that I would catch myself trying to figure out, I would be suddenly thinking about something and I'd catch myself trying to figure out, why was I thinking about this? That's not what I sat down to think. And then I'll actually linearly, back chain and the different ideas that cut through. So yeah, it's quite a bit, it looks at some level almost as if it is ADHD, right? You're thinking of too many different things. You're not just thinking about a very specific problem. But oftentimes, for me at any rate, when you're not trying to solve the problem is when the problem gets solved, for me. And I think other people have said this, and many people have said that you go sleep on it, then things will happen when you wake up. It just happens to me like all the time. And then basically letting the mind go where it wants to go, oftentimes is a useful heuristic, because I will always find connections to anything that I was originally thinking about. So the answer to what happens in the back of my head, it's all sorts of things. It might, cartoonishly, it might be like that Homer with the monkey, clapping in his head, but I think it's like pretty much any things that are like tangentially connected. And to me, I sometimes think honestly that, I don't indulge in the AGI wishful thinking most of the time, but I actually think that is getting to the goal by not being goal directed is what I think is a very important thing that we do in general, because oftentimes we don't even know what our goal is. And, and so it just, the act of sort of letting all these different thoughts come through your head, to me at least, maybe it's wishful thinking because I haven't focused on the problem to be solved, but I found some other problem. But oftentimes you will solve an interesting problem, an interesting thing that you weren't thinking about originally. So yeah, it's pretty much all over the place. Things will it's the strangest thing I find is pretty much the only time, I mean, even when I'm teaching in a classroom with a huge number of students, I would still, basically my lectures are typically full of digressions that will bring them back to the original point. And that's just the way I think. And that's the way I think at least that's the way you can keep my attention. So I assume that's the way I can keep your attention. So if you just do the straightforward beeline to the solution, it gets boring, especially in lectures and stuff. So I essentially, while I'm doing the lecture, which is probably one of the fewest times where I'm the least distracted, I'm only thinking about that one thing, but I would still see connections to what I'm saying. And then I will make connections to that. I mean, oftentimes there is no such thing as a prepared lecture. Even with the prepared lectures, these digressions will happen and you will bring it back to the main line. And that's one of the most fulfilling things for me. I don't know what my students think, but certainly, the fact that you can make those connections.
Yeah, and I should note here that a couple of years ago, I think you had a recorded set of lectures from your intro to AI class or something.
Mm-hmm.
I had sat down and seen some of those. They're just wonderfully entertaining and illustrative. They're just very nice.
Yeah, no, I mean, I find that it's in a weird way. I mean, the lectures are hard. I mean, if you're sitting on the other side, I know how hard it is to pay attention. So I think, I mean, and actually it helps that I am easily distracted. And so I basically am aware of the fact that catching people's attention is hard. It's harder for people who actually can pay attention. And so they'll assume, to some extent, we think people are like us. I mean, and as much as we have a theory of mind and so on, we do tend to think that people are more or less like us. And so people who actually have very good attention may actually be bad teachers because they think everybody else has the same level of it. So in my case, I don't, so I can actually see that you have to get people engaged. Yeah.
What do you tend to think about when you're not actively trying to think about something? What goes on in the back burner?
Yeah. Different things. I wish I could stop. Probably other people do too. I used to not think of myself as having any sort of anxiety. I think in the COVID times, even though we've been, lucky so far, it's just hard to not have this back burner worry about things going bad with you or people around you or just other people. It's just not a time when you can just be happy and carefree. I also think about work and things that I wish my students were doing that I'm trying to nudge them into a certain direction and they're not taking it, or and I think about how to optimize my interaction with students or the projects we work on. And again, I really don't want to think about that, but because I would rather be fully engaged in what, when I'm not working, I'm playing with my kid, and I would rather be fully engaged in that. And it's sometimes hard. Yeah, but I don't think about, I guess, chores. I think more about work or about the state of the world. Sometimes I think I'm starting to think more about what can we do this weekend, and I'm very happy about that because the weather is getting better.
That's good.
Yeah.
What do you tend to think about when you're not actively trying to think of something? What goes on in the back burner?
Oh, you mean like, okay, well, I have certain obsessions at different points in time. And so right now and for the last little while, so it depends, right? So I do have some work obsessions, and that happens to be things related to games right now, like game theory. And so I often am thinking about that when that's kind of on the back burner. But more in terms of like just hobbies, I'm kind of an avid, my family would say obsessive fisherman. I enjoy fishing, and so so I'm often thinking about that. And right now in particular, because we're sort of in between seasons, I'm often sort of daydreaming about the opening of the season to go fishing. Yeah, and that is actually, by the way, that is where I find my serenity, like more than just like when you were saying that when you work out. For me, that is the most serene thing, just being on a river or a lake and nobody around and just fishing. That there's something very, very zen about that for me.
Interesting. But I imagine that this is the sort of wistful longing type thinking. There's not really a background thread planning your next outing, or is that?
Well, sometimes it's wistful longing. Yeah, most of the time, I guess I would say it's that. Sometimes it's not. Like sometimes it's like problem solving.
Huh.
Like last fall, I was because. Well, I'll just finish this. Last fall, I had a mission to catch a sturgeon. So sturgeon are these big fish, and in much of the world, they're actually really endangered. But it just happens that around here in the St. Lawrence, they're actually really, really common. So we're actually allowed to catch them. And so, yeah, I had a mission of catching a sturgeon. And so, it was like not working at all. I was like coming up empty all the time. So I was really starting to have to think about, okay, how my equipment and all. So it's very much a planning thing that is going on. Yeah, but most of the time it's kind of wistful longing. Yeah.
Interesting. Imagine sharing with people that in the middle of some meeting when you're lost, like that's what's going on.
Yeah, I tend not to share that too much. Although, some people know of my particular obsessions, but I don't interrupt with saying, I've got it.
Eureka.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. What do you tend to think about when you're not intentionally trying to think about something? What goes on in the back burner, to the extent that you're aware of it?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, let's see. I think I tend not to think about work stuff too much. Think about politics or maybe a book I'm reading or an article I've just read. Sometimes I think about something I'm like working on, like if it's like a language or something like that. When I think about work stuff, I tend to fixate on problems. I'm not great at turning off, so sometimes those will stick with me. But I don't know, I try to kind of use tricks like listening to a podcast or something to turn my brain off on that when I can.
Do you struggle with turning your brain off, or do you feel that's fine, you got that under control?
For some reason, it's easier as a professor than it was as a student. Because there's so much going on, I can kind of actually context switch. And I think learning how to context switch was important. I think when I was a grad student, you're working on one thing for months at a time, you really do tend to obsess about it. I have a bit of that kind of personality. So I do obsess about problems and get intense about them. But as a professor, I think I do that less. Yeah.
What do you think about what do you tend to think about when you're not actively trying to think about something? To the extent that you're aware.
I think we run, I run counterfactuals, right? There's a lot of these decision points in life, and some of them you suspect wouldn't matter too much, and like your baseline happy would be about the same either way. But then there's some you think back to every now and again, and you wonder, like, if that went a different way, where would I be? Like if I had valued something different at that time, where would I be? And for me, this is often around career decisions, both, what I chose to go do and, where I chose to do it. Was a balance of many factors, and you always wonder if you sort of balance those factors right, or if later on in life you're going to feel like you missed something.
And are you able to do anything with those counterfactuals, or does it just feel like background processing? Is there ever
Does something come to you as a consequence of those counterfactuals?
I mean, no, I mean, sometimes it's escapism. To minor degrees, it's like, what if I just done that? Like, where would I be? What would I be doing? And it's, in the moment, you often pretend like it's something better. And when in reality, it's probably not. So, sometimes it's that, and sometimes it is, an actual sort of internal analysis of like, what do I value? Or like, what do I say I value versus what are the choices I made indicate that I value, and trying to reconcile that a bit.
What do you tend to think about when you're not actively trying to think about something? What goes on in the back burner, so to speak, to the extent that you're aware of it?
I like to daydream. I like to, I like to think about like my hobbies. So I think about, go back to say the triathlon and think about my swimming technique, I'll think about football and things like that. So I like to sort of actively daydream around topics that I know are nice, so that I'm putting my mind into kind of things that I think it's happy and kind of distracting to think about. But obviously there's a tendency to always think about work. And that's almost like inertia, just because we do it for so much of our day that it makes sense that, I guess, in your mind. So it's not that I try not to allow it to have entire priority in my mind, but of course, sometimes it just happens.
And what do you tend to think about when you're not actively trying to think about something? Like what goes on in the back burner to the extent that you're aware of it?
Something. I mean, the point is there are so many different threads and that I'm interested in, whether it's related to science or whether it's about how do you organize research, what's happening in the world today, politics, what is ethics, what does fairness mean, philosophy, a lot of different things I'm interested in. I try to basically connect all disciplines together. So I generally sort of like taking a problem from one discipline or in one context and reasoning about it in a different. So what would ethics say about this computer vision problem, or what would be a philosophy for taking on a particular approach to mathematics. So things like this.
What do you tend to think about when you're not actively trying to think about something to the extent that you're aware of it? Is it just more simulations and rollouts of the future?
Oh, man. I think a lot of life is relational, right? It's about people and others and processing that. And I think it takes me time to catch up on processing some of those interactions. And so I think a lot of my background brain work is processing what certain things mean. I think I'm not the best at an argument, like an emotional argument, because either I go into the subtractions and X's and Y's, which are not usually great at validating the other person or being concrete about the situation, or it takes me time to process it. And so I think that's maybe a little bit of what goes on.
Mm-hmm. What do you tend to think about when you're not actively trying to think about something? What goes on in the back burner to the extent that you're aware of it?
Nothing. I enjoy very little more than not thinking about anything. I love it. It's wonderful.
And you're able to achieve it. And you're able to achieve it. It's just nothing.
Yeah. It's just nothing. So I live in I live in Atlanta, of course, which, as you know, is the world's largest urban forest. And it is a beautiful place to spend time. And in particular, I live in a place called Peachtree City, which is the largest golf cart community in the country.
I did not know that.
And it's wonderful. It's 110, 120 miles of golf cart paths. They're like laws that require that everything be reached by golf cart. It's kind of crazy. But I live in this nice house, and the house is on a golf course. And in particular, my house oversees the 17th green. So one of the things I enjoy doing, particularly on a day like today, where it's about 90 degrees, but there's enough of a breeze, I will sit underneath my deck and I will listen to music and I will read comic books, or I will go on Twitter or whatever it is that I'm doing to shut off my brain and just enjoy people very far away from me playing golf, right? I won't call it Zen, but it is a very relaxing and kind of centering, while, you know, sort of experience. You just kind of watch these people you don't know and see a piece of their life as they go by, cursing because they missed a putt or whatever, while you're listening to music and just kind of enjoying the breeze. It's a wonderful thing. And it's a place where I often find myself just kind of staring off into the middle distance and watching a duck or something or not, and just kind of time passes by. It's very nice.
Oh, that sounds really relaxing.
Oh, it is fantastic. I just installed 2 big outdoor fans. These things, man, like they could like lift a jet airplane. It's really nice. And just kind of have them going by, and the wind sort of goes, and just kind of listening to music and reading comic books, and or playing Plants vs. Zombies, which is what I tend to do a lot of, and just kind of relaxing and shutting off your brain. It's great.
What do you tend to think about when you're not actively trying to think about something? What goes on in the back burner to the extent that you're aware?
Random things, and I mean, sometimes I, chew on what someone else has told me. I'm wondering, what's that supposed to mean? There are days when I'm just chewing on the past, but that's not the pleasurable daydreaming that I prefer to do. So I think I like daydreaming about some weird, future AI, or, how to get there, or how we might try something entirely different and crazy. And I also like sometimes daydreaming about this, parallel universe based on quantum physics. Supposedly we're in a simulation environment and I might be a wave. I find all that very entertaining.
You are a particle, or a giant particle that pops in and out of existence due to the fields that exist.
Yeah, I feel very wave in that regard.